2018 State of Ransomware webinar. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the threat of ransomware with some special content from Datto. My name is Ben Schmerler, and I'm the Senior IT Risk Advisors here at DP Solutions. Before we really get started with the content, we just want to go over a few things. First of all attendees have been placed on mute, so we're not going to have any background noise. But of course, we do welcome and appreciate questions. So make sure that throughout the session today, if you want, you can use the little question box or the chat feature to type them out, and we'll take the opportunity to answer everything as it comes up. And certainly at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. Just to give you a little bit of an intro of Datto and our special guest, Michael DePalma. Datto is a valuable DPS partner that helps customers protect against threats to their data and ensuring business continuity. Ransomware is an evolving threat, and we thought it would be great to bring them back and provide you with some continuing education about what's out there this year in 2018 and how you can help mitigate the risks associated with it. Today, Michael DePalma is going to run with today's content, and in his role as Channel Development Manager for Datto, Mike goes to a number of trade shows and technology conferences throughout North America. He frequently presents alongside members of the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. Mike strives to connect with business owners to educate them on current cyber threats and the role business continuity plays in combating these threats. And as you can imagine, you can see why we wanted to have him talk with you today. So Mike has some content to go over, and then later on we'll do some Q&A. So again, please feel free to send some questions in chat, and we'll be sure to address them. Without further ado, Mike, go right ahead and give us a start.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you all of you guys for joining us today. So as I was mentioned, my name is Mike DePalma, Channel Development Manager with Datto. Very quickly, for those of you not familiar with Datto, we are a backup and disaster recovery company, business continuity company based out of Norwalk, Connecticut, so about 40 miles east of Manhattan. We did celebrate our 10-year anniversary last year, so we've been growing pretty steadily. We're up over 1,400 employees worldwide. We've got 26 offices around the world, and we've got 9 data centers around the world, 2 here in America, 1 in Reading, Pennsylvania, and 1 out in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm going to get to the importance of those 2 data centers a little bit later on, but we do protect close to 400 petabytes of data, so it's actually one of the largest private clouds in all the world. So very secure, and if anybody has any questions about our private cloud, obviously you could put that in the chat box as well, or reach out to me afterwards. But really, what we've been doing, and what's kind of been one of the things we've been talking about on all those panels that was mentioned earlier, is kind of rethinking backup. Because still, when I go out and talk to business owners, or we're at a conference and I'm talking to folks, people are still viewing backup as just this kind of insurance policy, just in case my building burns down or there's a huge storm and I need to have that second copy of my data just in case the world around me is collapsing. And so most of the folks I talk to, especially in the SMB community, they're using traditional backup, some form of traditional backup that they've been using for years, whether it's external hard drives, which is very common, tape, which is still very common, very prevalent all over the world, really. And then we've seen a movement over to cloud backup, which is great. You've got a second copy of your data, different geographical location, which is great. But there are limitations to all of these forms of backup. And these limitations are really what the criminals are trying to exploit. So some of those limitations include, well, higher failure rates. If you're still using tape, you can look up some studies, and there's very high failure rates with tape. Plus, if anybody's tried to restore from tape, it could be a very painstaking and painful process. But really, all of the backup solutions that you might buy over the counter and not go through, a managed service provider like DP Solutions, they're going to have higher failure rates. Manual testing. Anytime you're adding the human element into things, the risk of human error becomes that much more prevalent, right? So this doesn't just mean manually taking the backups, but also testing the backups. Who is responsible for testing those backups? This is something that the criminals know most folks are not doing, and they know that they can exploit those loopholes. The biggest thing that these criminals are exploiting is the next one, which is slow recovery time. They know that most businesses are backing up their data. So if they hit you with a virus or ransomware, they know that, yeah, your data's backed up, but how long is it going to take you to restore that data? How long are you going to be down as you wait for all that data to come back? I mentioned a lot of folks are moving to the cloud, and if that's your only backup source, you find out how long it would take you to pull that data back down from the cloud. I mean, if you've got several terabytes of data up there, you might be looking at a week or more to get all that data restored. A lot of the companies out there that offer cloud backups, they could say, yeah, we could speed that up for an additional cost. So it's really critical that you understand how long it's going to take you to get that data back. And then lastly, obviously, risk of infection or theft. A lot of those, traditional backup solutions, they're not prepared to prevent infection or even theft. If you've got your only backup solution on premise, a lot of folks aren't locking those up. I walk into offices all the time and you see their data room unlocked, and if you have a break-in or anything else, even a disgruntled employee, that backup can be stolen pretty easily. So that's why you want to have multiple copies of your data, including copies of your data that are off-site. And so what's the difference between these traditional backup solutions and business continuity? Well, first and foremost, I mentioned our 2 data centers. Any business continuity solution that you're looking at really should have a hybrid solution, which would mean you have an on-premise backup, which is going to obviously give you quicker restores, whether it's just a file or full-blown restoration, but you also have backups off-site. I mentioned our 2 data centers. Essentially, with this solution, you have an on-premise device, taking those backups, backing up that server, and then it's also going to replicate to those 2 data centers. And the reason why we chose those locations were that they were on the opposite side of the country, right? So if you have something going on with your server, okay, you've got an on-premise solution, they'll be very fast. If there is one of those disasters that most people are worried about and the entire building goes down and that on-premise device is compromised, you've got a second copy of your data out in Reading, Pennsylvania. Now, God forbid, whatever's impacting your office is impacting Reading, Pennsylvania. Well, you've got a third copy of your data out in Salt Lake City, Utah. And when I got into the IT space, one of the first things somebody told me was, with any solution you're looking at, assume that it fails. What happens next? And anyone will tell you to combat ransomware, you need a multi-layered approach, right? It starts with firewalls and antivirus, and assume that fails. What happens? Well, I've got my on-premise backup. Okay, what happens when that fails? Okay, well, I've got a second copy of my data in Reading, Pennsylvania. All right, well, God forbid that fails. Now we've got a third copy of your data. So multiple copies of your data in different geographical locations is key, because you don't want your only backup a mile up the road. Or you don't want somebody manually every Friday taking that home with them and have the potential of them leaving it in the car, or just leaving it in their living room or something like that, where you're going to have a risk of that either being damaged or stolen. So that's a very key component. Automation is very key also. I mentioned you start adding the human element into things, you increase the risk of that user failure. And so any kind of business continuity solution is going to allow you to set the schedules for as often as you want to take those backups, and then those are going to be all automated. And the testing aspect of it as well is going to be automated. You're not relying on somebody to do that. They're going to be automatically tested. If there happens to be a failure, folks over at DP Solutions are going to be notified of that, and they're going to be proactive in looking into why that backup is failing, instead of being reactive and finding out that your backups have failed when a ransomware attack or any kind of disaster were to strike. The most important piece, and the one that I really want everyone to understand properly, is that you want to have an image-based solution. Most of those traditional backup solutions, if not all of them that I mentioned early on, they're file-based backups, right? You're going to tell them which files and folders you want to be backed up, and then at the end of the day, you just have copies of those files and folders. With an image-based solution, it's a little bit different. It's actually taking a snapshot of that entire server that we're backing up. So not only are you capturing the operating systems and the applications, you're also capturing all those files. So you've got everything. Everything that lives on that server is replicated to that on-premise device, and then subsequently replicated to those 2 data centers. And what it allows us to do is, once we get that base image of all of the information that's on that server, you're going to set your schedules through that automated process, and you're going to be able to take block level incremental changes. Now, one of the things that's unique to our solution is that we've got what's called inverse chain technology, whereas most traditional backups are layered upon previous backups, which means if you are infected, there's a good chance that your backups are infected as well. What inverse chain does is it means that every one of those backups, whether you're backing up hourly, more often, daily, they're all going to be independent of one another. And so if a ransomware attack occurs, it truly is as simple as rolling back to that last clean backup and getting started from there. So if you're backing up hourly, you might run the risk of losing an hour's worth of work, but you're able to really prevent the fact that those previous backups are going to be infected. And that's critical. It's really taking out a lot of the leverage that these criminals have, and I'll get into that. But really the key feature of business continuity is the virtualization capabilities. It's really the ability to say, okay, if my server is infected, if my server goes down, that on-premise device can act as my server. We could spin up a virtual machine right from that on-premise device and get everyone in your office back up and running, taking away the downtime. I mentioned, that restore process with a lot of the traditional backup solutions. This is going to reduce that to a matter of minutes or hours, because you're going to get your entire systems back up and running. Everyone that was operating off that server that was infected or destroyed, now you're going to be operating off of this device. And I'll get into what that looks like, but it really takes a lot of the leverage away. And really what these criminals are relying upon is that people are not educated, which is why we do a lot of these educational seminars, and that maybe they don't exactly know what to look out for, or they don't have the proper solution in place. And so really I've been giving ransomware specific presentations around North America for the last two and a half years. And a couple of years ago, you might get a couple of head nods when you talked about ransomware, but as the time has gone on, you get more and more folks in the audience that have either been hit with ransomware, know someone that's been hit with ransomware, maybe had a vendor or a client get hit with ransomware. And so we've heard more and more people asking questions and being more engaged, because what these criminals are trying to do is exploit human error, and they're trying to rely on the fact that people aren't prepared with their solutions. And so it kind of built up to what we saw last May, which was this WannaCry attack. And that then made ransomware the lead story on every newspaper, on every website. Really, no matter where you turned, you were hearing about this WannaCry attack. And what was unique about it is we've never seen anything that really had the reach that this particular attack had. I mean, this attack infected 220,000 computers worldwide in 150 countries. And what was interesting about it was, from the IT community, was a lot of these variants, they will try to figure out the size of your company, where you're located, the type of company you are, because they want to really try to get as much money out of you as possible. But what was interesting about WannaCry was they just asked for $300 across the board. They asked for it in Bitcoin because they know they're not going to be tracked with that, but they weren't trying to figure out how much money they can get from everybody. And so the thought within the IT community was, this is pretty scary, because what we thought was this was just a test run. They wanted to see how broad of a scope they can have with this particular variant and how many people they can infect very quickly. And phase two was going to be, okay, let's try to figure out exactly how much money we can get out of these folks. And so I was doing a presentation out in Pennsylvania a couple weeks after this attack occurred, and there was a gentleman from the FBI there. He was actually the head of the cybersecurity unit down in the Philadelphia office. And he was going through all kinds of really scary cyber threats, cyber warfare and all the rest. And then he finishes with ransomware, because obviously at that point it was the hot topic of the day. And so he's giving his theories on it. And he says, well, the FBI really has two theories. And the first one was the one that I just mentioned, that the IT community all kind of agreed upon, which was this was just a test, and that we're really preparing to see what that next phase will be. But at the time, he gave a second theory, which when I heard it at first, I didn't really give much credence to. But as the time has gone on, I really think that there's some validity to this. And what the second theory was that these criminals that did this, they really didn't care how much money they got from the actual ransomware attack, those $300 increments. The FBI said only about $300,000 changed hands, which may seem like a lot of money, but the ransomware epidemic is proving to show about $1 billion annually in revenue to these criminals. So $300,000 isn't really a lot, especially for the scope that they were able to attack. So the second theory was they didn't really care. What they really wanted to do was drive up the cost of Bitcoin. And we've seen a lot of stories over the last couple of months about Bitcoin, but it's been around for a while. And really what it was started with this utopian idea that eventually we're going to have this currency that can't be artificially inflated or deflated by federal banks or governments from all over the world. This was truly going to be a currency that would fluctuate with true markets, right? And that was the idea. And it was anonymous so that everyone can just be a part of it without governments really being able to track it. The problem was that anonymity really attracted the criminal community, because they knew that they couldn't get caught and they could do a lot of really bad things on the internet, like selling weapons, selling drugs, and all the rest. But they figured out that with this ransomware virus, they can ask for the money in Bitcoin and never be caught. So they've been asking for this money in Bitcoin for the last several years and collecting Bitcoin when it was only $100 per Bitcoin or a few $100s. And so if they were able to now inflate that cost and cause everybody to go out and buy it, they could make a lot of money, a lot more money than they can just through actually getting the ransomware payments. And so when you look at the cost of Bitcoin, and obviously it's been in the news a lot lately, it had been pretty flat since its inception. You'd see a couple blips here and there, but for the most part, it was in the few $100 range. And if you look at 2016 on January 1st, it was $443 to obtain one Bitcoin. This was a time when ransomware was still very prevalent and they were collecting a lot of money. The start of last year, it was $998 for a single Bitcoin. So it had gone up, but not drastically. When you see that first increase, that was May. That was when ransomware occurred, because what was happening, that's when WannaCry occurred, because what was happening was you had all these large corporations out in Europe that were gobbling up Bitcoin because they were afraid of that second phase. They wanted to make sure they had Bitcoin on hand, so if they are hit and they didn't have any way to get their data back, they can pay those criminals quickly, because one of the limitations of Bitcoin is it's not something you could just go into a bank and get a Bitcoin account set up. We at Datto, there's 4 people on my team that go around and do these presentations, and since we talk about Bitcoin a lot, the company thought, okay, you guys should have a Bitcoin account. So it's very small, it was $100, but we got an email, this is how you set up your account, and then they told us once it was set up, you're going to get the deposit. So we got that email, the deposit was in process. It took us 6 days to get just $100 into our account. Now there's ways to speed that up, which are going to cost more money, but the idea here is it's not something you can readily get, especially based on where you are. There's some Bitcoin ATMs on some college campuses or in Manhattan, but for the most part, if you're not around one of those really big cities, it could take a while. And so that's why they were gobbling it all up. And when you saw that huge spike, it peaked at 19,000, but we started this year at around $15,000 a Bitcoin. Now think about the folks that actually made money. You saw the news stories about maybe the 20-year-old kid who bought some Bitcoin back a few years ago and became a millionaire, and that's a sensational story. Or you might some of those savvy investors. But the people that really profited from this, the people that went from having maybe $1 million in Bitcoin to hundreds of millions of dollars in Bitcoin, that was the criminal community. Because you got to figure that these folks are not the guy in their basement doing these little attacks so they can make a few $1,000. This is what the organized crime community has been doing for the last several years. Organized crime here in the States, organized crime in Europe and China and Russia and all around the world, they figured out that they could make a lot of money with very little risk of getting caught. And so this is what they've shifted to. And so the folks that really profited from this were the criminals. And so, once people started seeing the rise, everybody kind of jumped on the bandwagon, but they were late. They were late to the party that the criminals have already been a part of for years. And so this was a theory. There's no way to actually prove this, but when you look at the numbers, it all makes sense. And so that FBI agent, I think, was really onto something. And when you look at kind of the history of ransomware, it actually started in 1989. It was the first case of ransomware. And we saw a couple little blips over the next couple of decades, but then all of a sudden in 2013, we really saw a rise. This screen right here shows the more prevalent, newer forms of ransomware out there, but the FBI will tell you that there's an estimated 4 million variants of ransomware around the world. I get the question all the time, or if I'm sitting on a panel, they'll ask the gentleman from Homeland Security or the FBI, okay, well, what's the government doing to combat this? And their answer will be, well, we can go out and try to put a lot of resources and money into shutting down one of these variants. And then when we can have a great success story in the papers and pat ourselves on the back, but we know that that's great, but now we've got 3,999,000 to go with new ones popping up every day, right? So their main shift has been education. That's why they're out in the community so much trying to educate folks. But really, when you think about it, what happened in 2013? Why did we see such a spike when the virus has been around for a long time and it's pretty easy for them to deliver that virus? Well, again, it goes back to Bitcoin. People figured out that they could marry the Bitcoin explosion with ransomware, and they could have the best of both worlds. It's a very easy virus to deliver. It's very simple. It allows you to kind of attack anyone you want, because most viruses, they're going to try to attack the folks that actually have valuable data, whether it's financial information they could use to just extract money from you, personal data they could use for identity theft. With ransomware, all they're doing is encrypting the data. So they just know that you're going to pay to get it back, because regardless of what industry you're in, you can't operate without that data. So it casts a huge net. And so now they've got Bitcoin involved where they could say, hey, we're going to ask for this money in Bitcoin because we're not going to get caught. So basically all of those variants that we showed, they're exclusively going to ask for the money in Bitcoin. And that's why we've seen such an explosion. And I mentioned the $1 billion number. That comes from the FBI. That was from July 1st, 2016 to July 1st of 2017. They estimated that about $1 billion transferred from the business community over to these criminals. But they'll also tell you that the actual impact of these attacks is closer to $75 billion because this number includes the cost of data loss, folks that never get any of your data back. Only about 75% of the folks that pay the ransom get any of their data back. And within the other 75%, they might get some of their data back, or they might get it back in piecemeal. So there's a real cost to the data loss. But more importantly, it's that cost of downtime. How much money is it going to cost you to be down for a couple of days or several weeks to get that data back? That is really what's extremely costly, and the criminals know that. When they really know they have two pieces of leverage. So if you look at the screen, there's two SCARs, and I really want you to take away these two acronyms because they're very important, and these are the ones that the criminals are exploiting. The first one on the left is your RPO, your recovery point objective. Very simply, how much data are you at risk of losing at any given time? That's the first piece of leverage these criminals have. They're going to assume that you're backing up your data, but are you backing it up often enough? And more importantly, are you testing it? Because if you're not testing your backups, there's no way you could answer that RPO question. And so they know that's their first piece of leverage. If you're not backing up your data, or you're not backing it up often enough or testing it, they know you have no other recourse but to pay. But if you do have a good backup solution, and you're testing those backups, and it's at an aggressive enough RPO schedule where you could absorb whatever data loss you might have, whether that's hourly, daily, or weekly, that's enough for you. Okay, great. You've taken out one of their legs. You've taken out that left-hand side of the screen. The second piece of leverage that they know they have, and the reason why most people pay, is that star on the right. RTO means your recovery time objective. How much downtime can you absorb before it really starts to impact your business? And they know that for most traditional backup solutions, it's going to take several days or even weeks to get all that data back and get all of your systems up and running. And so they're going to price that ransom payment at something where it's cheaper to actually pay the ransom than it would be to be down for several days. That's the second piece of leverage. And that's where business continuity comes in and tries to eliminate that side of the screen. We're obviously going to be taking your backups, testing those backups. The RPO side is taken care of. But as I mentioned, the virtualization capabilities allow you to reduce that downtime to minutes or hours instead of days or weeks, and really eliminates both sides of leverage that they have. And so we did a ransomware specific survey. First one we did was in 2016. Second one was in 2017, largest of its kind, that we were actually looking at ransomware specifically. And we interviewed two groups of people. We interviewed the managed services community, which is the outsourced IT community, DP Solutions and all the rest all over the world. And we also interviewed small businesses from around the world. And on those, when we talked to the managed service providers, they were very well aware of ransomware. Obviously, they live and breathe this stuff. 6 and 7 of them had clients that were hit with ransomware over the last couple of years. What was surprising was we'd started this on July 1st of last year. And so we just looked at the first half. 6 and 10, 60% reported attacks in the first half of that last year alone. And so even just in the first 6 months, we were seeing it. And so when we looked at the cost of these ransomware payments, it was pretty surprising. The average cost of the small businesses that were hit was around $2,000. Now, I mentioned the $1 billion number. It's estimated that $709 million of that came from the SMB community. So they were the ones being attacked. So we're seeing that, even though you might see stories in the paper about hospitals and universities and municipalities that are hit and asked for these large sums of money, the vast majority of folks that are hit are in the SMB community. And look at it another way, $709 million, that's what the SMB community paid last year. Break that down into $2,000 increments, and you see the kind of net that these criminals are casting, and not only the amount of people that are affected, the amount of people that have no other recourse but to pay. It's just really a startling number. It shows you the amount of businesses that are being targeted. And when we talk to the actual small business community of the folks that were hit, over half, 57%, reported data loss. So that's where some of that money comes from. But even more importantly, 3 in 4 of them reported business-threatening downtime, enough downtime where it was close to putting them out of business or actually did. There's a study out that shows that for businesses in the SMB community that are down for a week or more, 74% close their doors within a year. because they couldn't absorb it and they can never catch back up. This is what the criminals are exploiting, and it's that downtime that's really the impact that drives that number up to that $75 billion number. Now, the last stat I'll give you is actually pretty startling to me. And if anybody wants to see the full report, I can obviously send that out. But of the folks that were highly concerned, when we talked to the managed services community, 9 to 10 of them were highly concerned, right? Because they see it every day. This was a slight uptick from last year where it was 88%. But the idea here is most of the folks in that space were highly concerned. The small business owners, on the other hand, were a little bit different. In 2016, we saw 34% of them, just over a third of them were highly concerned. We started this survey, remember, on July 1st. So this was after the WannaCry attack, where, again, front page of every paper, top story in every news site on the web, everybody saw it. I would have thought that the small business community would have now been more concerned. After seeing these stories, it only ticked up 4 points. Still less than 4 in 10 business owners are highly concerned about a billion-dollar industry that's only growing. And the criminals love the stat like this because they know they're going to have a great year in 2018 because they know most businesses are not protected. And so, as I mentioned, most folks do have a backup solution, right? Most folks are able to say that left-hand side of the screen is taken care of. The harder part is understanding how much downtime you would absorb. So regardless of what kind of solution you have, I would ask you to go out and try to figure that out internally after this webinar, or reach out to DP Solutions to come in and kind of audit that. But the harder part is to figure out what that would cost you. And so I'll give you some 2 examples of that to kind of get your mind thinking about what that would look like. And the first one is San Francisco Metro Transit Authority. I've been telling this story for over a year now, but they were hit with ransomware on Black Friday of 2016. Again, these criminals are really smart. They were asked for $73,000 in ransom, and to their credit, they came out immediately and said, yes, we were hit with ransomware. We're working on getting all our systems back up and running. Yes, we were asked for $73,000, but we have no intention of paying it. One, the government obviously recommends that we don't because you might not get your data back. It puts a bigger bullseye on your back to get hit again because they know that you'll pay, but also it emboldens these folks, right? So they didn't want to pay it. But the other reason they weren't going to pay it is they had a lot of money invested into their backup solution. They knew that they could restore. They didn't know exactly how long that would be. So what they decided to do is get their IT team together and say, okay, how are we going to get this up and running? Because the problem for them was the systems that were hit were their fare collection system. So they weren't able to collect fares on their bus system or their light rail system. And so when they looked at their solution, they said, okay, we're very confident we're going to have all of our systems back up online Sunday morning. So they were looking at 2 days of not being able to collect fares. So they had 2 options, really. The first would be shut down the light rail and the bus system on the 2 busiest shopping days of the year. That was an option that clearly wasn't something they could actually go with. So they went with door number 2, which was to give away free rides. That's what they did. They gave away free rides for 2 days until they got their systems back up and running on the light rail and the bus system. And they never reported how much money that cost because this was now a good story. They didn't have to follow up with news stories talking about how much money they lost. People were happy that they got free rides, right? Finally got everything up and running. So the good news for me as somebody who looks into these stories is they've got a lot of information on their website. So I could do the math for them. I go to their website and try to figure out what that cost them, and I see that they claim that they provide 735,000 rides a day. Now, they didn't break that down between how many of those folks were on the light rail, how many of those folks were on the bus system, but I do know that it costs $1 to ride the bus and $2.25 to ride the light rail. So they're down for 2 days. They lost anywhere between $1.5 and $3.3 million. Again, remember, they could have paid $73,000. They decided to restore from their backup, and their loss was anywhere between $1.5 and $3.5 million in revenue. That's the math that criminals want you to do. Metro Transit Authority in San Francisco can absorb something like this. Most small businesses cannot, and that's why so many people pay. And a couple weeks ago, I was in Manhattan doing a presentation. There was actually the head of cybersecurity for the entire FBI was there. Of course, I had to present behind him, so I had to make sure that whatever he was saying matched my statistics, right? So I was a little worried about that. I had this story in my presentation. Then I see he tells the same story, which was good because it verifies what I've been telling, but he tells the same story, except he doesn't do the math for them. He says, I don't know how much money they lost, but I could tell you if it hit us in Manhattan, I could tell you exactly what that number would be. If that hit us in Manhattan, we'd lose $50 million every day. So this attack here would have cost Manhattan $100 million over the course of 2 days. So it shows you the scope. So it's obviously going to be scaled down to whatever business you're in, but you should be able to try to start getting your head wrapped around of, if we're down for 2 days, 5 days, 2 weeks, even 6 hours, how much money are we losing? That's something you really got to figure out. But there's a second story that I think is a little bit better, because that's obviously me and the FBI doing some math based on numbers that are out there. This story shows a third party actually auditing the cost of downtime and justifying it. So I actually heard this story back in the fall from I was sitting on a panel with a gentleman from a company that does cybersecurity insurance. And obviously he's telling his story to kind of justify why you need cybersecurity insurance, which is a conversation you should have as well, but it's a separate conversation. And he told this story about a utility company in Lansing, Michigan. Large utility company. They had a very robust IT team, over 50 folks on their team. They get hit with ransomware. They're asked for $25,000. And so they say, hey, we've got a good IT team here. We don't need to pay this ransom. And so they spent a day trying to restore their systems. Finally, they made the decision that paying the ransom was the only action they could take to get their systems back up online. So they wound up paying that $25,000. They lost that day. They paid the $25,000. The issue was they didn't get all their systems up and running right when they paid that ransom. It actually took about a week for them to recover. So they had to figure out what that cost them so they could submit a claim to their cybersecurity insurance company and get it paid. And so they basically found that for them being down a week, it cost them $2.4 million. And they acknowledged that within that $2.4 million, about $400,000 of it was system upgrades. They needed to upgrade all of their servers and all of that, their network, but also upgrade their backup solution and all the rest. So they couldn't include that in their cybersecurity insurance claim. They had to just include what the cost of downtime was, and they settled on $2 million. So they submitted a claim for $2 million. The insurance company went and vetted it and looked through it. And, you know, insurance companies, they don't really want to pay on claims that aren't real. And so they looked at it, and eventually they cut a check for $1.9 million. There was a $100,000 deductible in there. And obviously this gentleman from the cybersecurity agency, he's saying this is why you need cybersecurity insurance. I was looking at it a different way, and I went and chatted with him afterwards to get some more details, and he was a very, very nice guy, and he sent me some links afterwards, so I started, you know, kind of looking into it. But if you think about it this way, I mean, this company not only paid the $25,000 in ransom, they had to pay close to $500,000 to upgrade all their systems. They had to absorb that $100,000 deductible, and all of that could have been prevented with a business continuity solution. And when you look at the ripple effects, as I got, you know, kind of more tied into this story, and I was Googling stories about it, I was kind of fascinated by it. There was a story from about 6 months later that said that within those 6 months, 25% of their IT team had quit. It became such a toxic environment trying to recover all of these things. They said, it's not worth the money I'm getting paid. I'm going to go find another job. So despite paying the ransom, despite absorbing the cost of the downtime, they had to then go out and replace 25% of their IT team, which anybody that's in that industry knows there's not a huge wealth of talent out there, because it's an industry that is dying for more people. So that's another painstaking process. So he tells the story about why you need cybersecurity insurance, because we will pay out. I'm saying, well, you've just justified the cost of downtime and really the need for business continuity. The two examples I gave, think about if they were to be back up and running through a virtualized state within the matter of, you know, a couple of minutes or a couple of hours. And so what does that look like? What does this business continuity look like? Well, if this represents your server and you get that scary red screen, which anyone that's been hit with ransomware has seen, saying, hey, pay me, click this button to pay me my money. Okay, well, now, since everything that lived on that server that's been infected lives on this on-premise device, we're able to spin up that virtual machine. It just takes a call to DP Solutions for them to get that going. And now everyone that was operating off of that original server is now going to be operating off of this on-premise device. And so it's truly business as usual. It's actually a true production environment. We're able to take backups while we're in this state. It allows you to work and operate just like you would have off your original server. And whenever that server is replaced or wiped clean, we could do what's called a bare metal restore and get all of that data, including all the changes you made, onto that new piece of hardware and get you back up and running, not just where you were when that ransomware attack occurred, but truly back where you were when you were ready to do that restoration. And so the benefits are pretty clear. Reduce the downtime. Take care of that right-hand side of the screen that we showed on that graph, which is that RTO. Again, we're reducing it from days or weeks to minutes or hours to get you back up and running. Your RTO and your RPO, well, you'll be able to answer those questions pretty easily. You can answer that RPO because you're going to set those schedules for as often as you want those backups to occur, and we're testing those. And the way we test them is a little bit different. We don't just test like to say, hey, the backups are there and the data is valid. We actually spin up a virtual machine in the background every single night, bring it up to a boot screen, take a snapshot of that boot screen, and send it off to DP Solutions so that they see that not only is the data there, all these cool virtualization capabilities that we're looking at on the screen right now, they are there too, so that you have the peace of mind to know that. So you can answer your RTO and your RPO pretty easily. And you've got the ability to do it locally from that device or from either one of those data centers. Remember, we're based out of Connecticut, right on Long Island Sound. So the big test for us as a company was Hurricane Sandy a few years back. At that point, we're still a growing company. Most of our businesses are based in the East Coast. So we had thousands of businesses that were operating out of our data center for weeks as their server rooms were being drained out, new racks were being put in, and all the rest. All shapes and sizes. They were able to do that. And a lot of those businesses wouldn't have been able to survive if they didn't have that ability to do it. And at the end of the day, when everybody's servers were back up and running and we did those restores I mentioned, we were able to say we didn't lose a single piece of data from any business impacted by Hurricane Sandy, which got us really worldwide recognition and propelled us to the global company that we are. So the ability to do it really anywhere allows you to know no matter what's going on around me, I'm going to be able to keep my business up and running. And that's the difference between business continuity and traditional backups. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to turn it over back to Ben to take any questions. Ben, I don't know if we've got any questions coming in.
Yeah, I have a few here. And some of these I may give a few cents on as well, because you may have, I may have insights you don't. So the first question I've got is, what about ransomware on, mobile devices and other sort of bring your own device type things? The question is broadly, should there be concerns about that? I think it's a very broad question, especially as it pertains to Datto, data management, et cetera. But what are your thoughts?
I think it's definitely a threat. I mean, these guys, it started with, last year, a couple of years ago, nobody thought that a Mac can get infected. But obviously they are trying to infect it, and it's going to go to the mobile devices as well. These guys are really smart. They try to stay 1-2 steps ahead of the IT community and the authorities. So I haven't seen a ton of numbers that way, but I would certainly guess that it's going that way. That would be something, I'd probably turn back to you and see what you're doing on the mobile side, because I know there are some things. A Datto is not going to be backing up mobile devices, but
right.
I don't know, maybe you have some other solutions out there that you're offering your clients, because I think that is going to be a threat in the future.
Certainly. I think it touches two things. One is data management in general, which is to say, mobile devices are being used for business-related purposes, personal devices often. And it's important that there's an understanding about what happens on those devices, where that data sits, that the device itself is not where the data is stored. Obviously we want to keep these devices, more for productivity than any kind of storage, because which sort of leads back into Mike's point about making sure you have a good, DR plan, data management plan in the first place. Additionally, obviously, I think it's very important that mobile devices that are used for this be part of like a mobile device management solution, which we could help you with. And of course, the actual policies and usage needs to be articulated well to staff. If you're going to use company information on this stuff, make sure that you do X, Y, and Z. And we can talk about that a little bit broader. I'm going to move on to another question here. You talked a lot about ransom and, places where the ransom wasn't paid and where the ransom was paid. And so the question I have is, if there's no solution here, like a Datto, and we have something critical, should the ransom be paid? Like as a philosophy, what expectations should be made if we're in a situation where that 25K or 75K or whatever that number is out there, and we feel like we may need to pay them off? What do you think? Is it worth paying?
I would say you should not pay the ransom. Obviously, if you've got no backup and you've got no other recourse, it should be your last option. And the reasons are pretty simple. I would say, well, the number I gave you, that you may not get your data back, or you might get that screen that says, hey, thank you for your payment. That's your down payment. Pay me some more. It also, more importantly,
puts point of all.
Yeah, and I think more importantly, it puts this bigger bullseye on your back. Once you pay, think about it. Think about it from the criminal's perspective. They could either try to find a new victim, or they can keep attacking the victim that they know will pay. And there's a lot of stories out there that say, okay, you pay that initial ransom. If you're not doing anything to clean up the problem or address the problem, that virus stays in the background if you're not cleaning it up. So you'll see it either pop back up, or a criminal say, okay, I'll hit them with another variant because I know they'll pay. They don't have it. You'll pay, and then they'll ask you for more money. It's like the bully in the cafeteria asking for your lunch money. They're going to keep going back until you don't pay. And so definitely I would say you can't pay, but I also understand at some point, if you've got no other recourse, people just have to do it. So it becomes down to having a disaster recovery plan, education internally, and making sure that you have other options in the pay. It should be your absolute last option.
Yeah, but it speaks to the broader point. If you're asking the question is, should I pay this ransom because I don't have faith in my backup solution, then there needs to be a real talk about what kind of solutions in place and why you don't have faith. We shouldn't be in a situation where we even have to ask that question. We should have a reliable enough DR/backup solution where they could set the ransom to whatever they want, and we're like, well, who cares? We've got our data, take a hike. So I definitely think we should. This is the type of question that, I guess maybe it's important to ask, but at the same time, we don't want to ever get to the point where this is a legitimate question that we have to ask.
Exactly.
Anyway, here's another question. I only visit trusted websites, and am I still at risk? I'm only going to the Amazons and the Yahoos of the world, or what have you. Am I at risk? And I would say yes, but what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. One of the things that these guys try to do is, some of those ads you see on Facebook. I was actually doing a presentation with a gentleman from the Department of Homeland Security. The example he gave were all those little quizzes that you see on Facebook, which you think, okay, I'll do a quiz about how much I know about Disney movies or all the rest. And it looks like maybe it's just clickbait when you go through it, but they're actually trying to gather some information from you so that they can go attack you. And the other story that my another colleague of mine tells all the time is Mr. Chow. Their website was attacked, and it looked just like it was infected, and they actually took over control of MrChow.com. And so anybody that went to that website and they clicked on any link on there, they were infected by ransomware. And so a lot of these websites that on their own, they're not they're not bad websites. They have the risk of these criminals getting in and taking over the website, and the company might not even know that they're responsible for infecting these. So yeah, all these things, it's a scary time, but there are stories like that.
Ads too. A lot of the ads, a lot of people don't realize that, ads on the internet are not exactly like ads in, say, a newspaper, where you go out to the, we're here in Baltimore, they call it Baltimore Sun, you want to purchase an ad in the paper and you do it, and it's vetted, and you can't just post whatever ad you want. The thing about a lot of ads for a lot of legitimate websites is they are just getting whatever is sent to them. And if that ad is compromised, you're visiting, some news site or what have you, but you don't know what that ad is, that inline ad in the browser. So you got to be careful with that sort of thing. And these things can look seamless. So we were just, there's another question about, will I get the files back? So we're going to go over that one. One last question. Will antivirus software protect me from ransomware?
Well, I'll tell you, you have to have a multi-layered approach. I would say that, you want to have AV in place. But I also, when we looked at it from our 2016 report, it was close to, and I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I want to say it was in the high 80s or 90% of these small businesses that were hit did have an antivirus in place. Yeah. And so it's not to say you shouldn't have one. Obviously, it's stopping a lot from getting in, but it's not the, again, like I said, assume everything fails. I think it's a good model. Yeah. So you want to have it. If it fails, you want to have this. This is the last line of defense. So, I would definitely, not to say you shouldn't have any of that stuff, but it's not going to prevent all this stuff from getting in. I'm sure you've seen the same thing, Ben.
I would make 2 points on that. One is, first of all, I equate antivirus to the flu shot, which is to say that, you could take a flu shot, still get the flu. Everybody knows somebody who got their flu shot and they still come in and like, man, I got this flu and I can't shake it. Well, antivirus is the digital equivalent in a lot of ways. It's very good at protecting you, but it's not a panacea. It doesn't solve all these problems. the other point I would make is that antivirus is just like any other technology product, good but flawed. And there's a reason you get updates. There's a reason you get new stuff in this, which is that the threats are evolving, and so is antivirus. And so that your point, Mike, about multi-layered approach, I think, is very important. Anyway, I think we're going to call it here. I don't really have any other questions. I really appreciate everybody joining us today. As you can see on the screen, we've got some contact information for myself and, of course, dpsolutions.com. We have a recording of the presentation we can email out later today. If you have any further questions, again, reach out to me or your DPS rep. And that concludes today's presentation. Thank you and have a very great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks.